What's up everybody, 40 the Broadway Saiyan here, and welcome back again to my YouTube channel, bringing you guys another video on Dissidia Final Fantasy Opera Omnia. For this video, we're going to be covering the next piece of content that's going to be coming out for Global Opera Omnia, which is the Odin Ultimate Trials. So we're going to be able to challenge Odin. We're going to be touching up on the summoning board passives that we get from the summon boards and which ones are optimum depending on the role of the character. I'm also going to quickly touch up on kind of like the party comms that are ideal if you're going to be farming up these summon board points for Odin, on as far as like, you know, which super synergy character to take and then which friend unit to take and things like that. And then afterwards, the big highlight of this particular event is going to be the return of the Prince Noctis. So Noctis is going to get a rework. It's more of a minor rework, but it's still nice to have. But the biggest thing that he gets is going to be the debut of his LD and burst weapons. And we're going to be touching up on those. And I know a lot of you guys have been waiting for this particular LD and burst weapon to come out, and there is a reason for it, and we will discuss it in this video. We're going to be talking about the banners as well as the other synergy characters featured on this. So synergy with Noctis and this Odin Ultimate Trials is going to be Paladin Cecil. Irvine's going to be there. We're also going to see Fran. We're also going to see Fang, and we're also going to see Seven. So those are the characters that are going to be featured alongside Noctis for super synergy for the Odin Ultimate Trials. I'm also going to give you guys, brief rundown about the actual fight itself. This is going to be one of the more harder fights, so the section for that one might be a little bit longer, but I feel like it's needed, especially for those of you that may get unlucky and may end up walking away without Noctis's gear. So we're going to be touching up on that as well. And then as always, we're going to be doing that Let's Play for Noctis. I'll be real with you guys, he gets a little bit more complex because he's not a straightforward character. So that portion of the video is also going to be a little bit longer. So I do leave timestamps down below in the video description as well as the pinned comment. So if you want to like fast forward to a certain part of the video that you feel like is more value for you to watch, then those options are there for you on this video. All right, guys, now, before we move forward, you always know what I like to do. I like to give big thanks and shout outs to Rem and Dissidia DB because all the information that is found on this video comes from his website. Be sure to check it out, as well as to Macnull and the Dissidia Info, another fantastic resource for Opera Omnia, as well as the Opera Omnia Tracker, a great resource you could use to keep track of your progress, for example, with Dimensions End. Also, massive shout outs to the Tonberry Troop for all the time that they take to creating those beautiful infographics summarizing what these characters can do. And last but not least, the Final Fantasy TCC podcast, giving us Opera Omnia players a weekly podcast. Now, without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about the Odin Ultimate Trials as well as the return of the Prince Noctis. With the release of the Odin Ultimate Trials, players can now farm the necessary materials to level up Odin up to level 30, increasing the potency of his blessing. At level 30, Odin's blessing will now lower enemy defense by 15%, and if HP ever falls below 80% of max, Odin will be permanently increasing attack by 30%. Odin also offers the characters new unique passives unlocked from the summon board. Passive 1, Physical Resist Up, lowers physical damage taken by 10%. Passive 2, Physical Resist All, lowers the party's physical damage taken by 3%. Passive 3, Physical Power Up, increases the physical brave damage dealt by 10%. Passive 4, Odin Attack Up, increases attack by 5% when HP is 60% or greater. Passive 5, Odin base attack up, increases initial brave by 5% and attack by 2% when HP is 60% or greater. Passive 6, Odin Sneak Power increases brave damage dealt by 10% when attacking an enemy not targeting the user. Finally, Passive 7, Odin Receive Brave Heal Up increases brave gained by 5%. For your physical damage dealers that are not tanks, passives 3, 4, and 6 are good options. For your physical tanks, you can take the defensive route, having passives 1, 3, and 4, or 3, or 4, and 5 if you still want more of an offensive approach. For characters who do not wield physical damage, passives 4, 5, and 6 are ideal. Lastly, for magic-focused tanks such as Celeste or Edge, passives 1, 4, and 5 are good options. In terms of farming the level 100 Odin stage for summon boards and rewards, the fastest option, assuming you at least have Noctis' LD, would be to take him, a Mid-Italian or a turn delayer such as General Leo, and whomever else you are farming points for. You can also opt to take one of the other Super Synergy characters as well if you are unlucky in pulling for Noctis' gear. Lastly, if you want to farm 2 characters at a time, you can take one Super Synergy you have fully built, 2 characters you are farming, and either a friend, a Mid-Italian, or a friend unit that can delay. Noctis from Final Fantasy XV receives some powerful upgrades from the Odin Ultimate Trials coming from his Rework, LD weapon, and burst weapon. His skill 1 shooting star and its plus variant on top of what they already do are now a 2-hit non-elemental range single target brave plus 2-hit non-elemental range AoE brave plus single target HP attack with increased brave potency and an added 50% splash damage. The plus variant will not add to the turn count except during friend, summon, or burst mode. His skill 2 Warp Strike and its plus variant on top of what they already do have their brave hits increase to 4, increase brave potency, and increase brave overflow to 150%. The plus variant will also not add to the turn count except during friend, summon, or burst mode. His follow-up attack against targets inflicted with his point-blank warp debuff now recover his brave based on his attack before the brave hits, now deal 3 brave hits, and if Armiger unique buff is active, will deal an additional brave hit with a 120% brave overflow. Noctis' LD weapon permanently raises his own attack by 30%, and grants him access to the LD ability called Steel Pirouette, which has 3 total uses. Steel Pirouette is an 8-hit, non-elemental ranged AoE Brave plus AoE HP attack, dealing an additional Brave hit while Armiger is active, 150% Brave Overflow, deals 100% AoE HP damage, grants Noctis 3 stacks of Armiger for 5 turns, and a new unique buff called Bonds of Amity for 16 turns, which increases initial Brave by 80% and provides a Brave regen by 80% of initial Brave. It also grants the entire party a new unique buff called Warp Step for 2 turns. Warp Step increases attack by 20% and allows the party member to move their next turn right before their target's next turn. This specific turn will not add to the turn count. Just like his other skills, Noctis' LD ability will trigger his follow-up attack if the target is inflicted with point-blank warp. Noctis' burst weapon grants him access to the finish burst called Legacy of the Lucy, which is a 15-hit, non-elemental range, single-target Brave plus single-target HP attack with an increased Brave hit count while Armiger is active, increased Brave damage limit by 100%, and increased Brave and HP damage limit by 200%. The party-wide burst effect has a 3-turn duration, which allows Noctis to trigger a follow-up attack after a party member deals damage once per party member turn, which is a 3-hit, non-elemental range, single-target Brave plus single-target HP attack with an additional Brave hit while Armiger is active, 120% Brave overflow, heals own Brave based on 20% of the HP damage dealt. This attack cannot initiate the chase sequence, will not trigger after chase or counter abilities, but will trigger during other characters' burst phases. The same burst effect will not stack. Recommended artifact passes for Noctis post his Rework, LD debut, and burst debut are 3 copies of Attack plus 108 and either Max Brave plus 330 or Will of the Prince boost 2-star. Alrighty guys, so now that we've gone ahead and taken a look at what Noctis can bring to the table with his rework, LD, and burst weapon, what are my thoughts on this character? There's a reason that a lot of folks in the player base have been waiting for this particular character's burst and LD weapons to come out. As you could see, he has become an extremely powerful character, and I will tell you right now, even on the JP side of the game, he's still considered at least one of the top 10 characters to bring because of his amazing party utility. What makes this character so strong is that LD weapon, that LD buff warp step, giving your party members 20% attack as well as being able to take their next turn right before their targeted enemy takes their turn, and that turn is free. It doesn't count towards a turn count. What is more to ask? There is so many different setups that you could do if you have Noctis's LD weapon alone, and then let's not forget that burst. So that burst effect is super powerful and super unique in that Noctis does a follow-up attack after a party member, including himself, does damage. So Noctis brings just so much turn shenanigans, so many free turns, so many ways for you to be able to complete some of the harder boss fights that we're going to be seeing later on without even the boss taking a single turn. It's possible to be able to do that. There's been some, different party comps that I've seen of like bosses getting like 0 turns because Noctis literally carries the party. So he's powerful. There's really nothing more to say. The character is powerful. There's a reason why there's a lot of hype for him. Now going into the banners, because there are going to be two banners. There's no free multis, guys. Sorry, I didn't mean to say free. The first banner is going to have Irvine and Fran and also 7 featured on it. And then the other one is going to have Noctis's EX weapon on there, as well as Paladin, Cecil, and Fang. So between the two banners, I almost want to put a little bit more value on the one with Paladin Cecil, especially for those of you that are hoping to tackle the Chaos Challenge, because the Chaos Challenge for this one is actually hard given the characters that we have for the synergy for it. And personal recommendations is you want at least Paladin Cecil on your roster if you're going to be doing that, as well as obviously Noctis with his LD. So I'm going to give a little bit more value to that banner. Now the other banner with Irvine, Fran, and 7, as far as the characters featured on there, I would say Fran is probably the best one there because at least she has her powerful debuffs, which, gain an additional effect and become more potent, every time you deal damage. So she has that going for her. 7, kind of a niche character. She's usable. You can definitely create a party around her, but the thing is that she's so regulated to single target boss fights, which is, at least this is a single target boss fight for Odin. So she has some decent options there. And then Irvine, I feel like, is a little bit on the outdated side until he gets another rework or something like that. He may not be bringing much to the table at this point. He does complement Noctis and any other ranged characters that you may have built because he is our only ranged Imperil specialist. But at this point, he's more of the he's definitely more on the outdated side, and as well as Fang on the other banner. Now the cool thing about Fang, at least her launch mechanics are actually pretty easy to set up, but as far as the rest of her kit goes, she's still on the outdated side, but she is still usable depending on your party comp, because it is all about party compositions. But both of these banners, just having Noctis on there alone just brings so much tremendous value, just knowing what this character can do and how far he could really carry you throughout the difficult content that we're going to be seeing later on in Opera Omnia. Now, if you are only chasing the LD weapon and you do plan on pulling for the Bosch Lost Chapters banner, as well as the 9 banner, which is going to be coming out after the Bosch Lost Chapters, Noctis's burst weapon will also be featured there. So if you only want to go for the LD weapon, which is what gives Noctis his crazy buff that he gives to the entire party, then you could go for it there, and then afterwards, hopefully you could pull the burst weapon on those 2 upcoming banners. But if this character is a favorite, which I'm actually growing to like Noctis myself, I may actually just pull straight on for this banner, especially because I personally don't have any plans to pull for Bosch or 9 with my resources. But then again, it's all up to you guys depending on your resources and also your roster. But I would say that even if you have a really solid roster, you've been playing for a while, I would still pick up Noctis. Noctis is totally worth it. And like I said, there is a reason why this character has been highly anticipated, because of his amount of party utility with his free turns and all the cool different things that he can do to really help trivialize some of the upcoming harder content. All right, guys, so now we're going to go ahead and take a look at the Odin Chaos boss fight, as well as touching up on the Chaos Challenge. The Chaos fight against Odin will be one of the more difficult and tricky Ultimate Trial fights. Odin is weak to the Holy Element, resistant to magic brave damage, and immune to being delayed. Odin wields several abilities that can auto-break, have high turn rate, and 100% accuracy even if blinded. He can also inflict doom, which causes a character to auto-break after the debuff expires. Hands down, his most lethal ability will be his recast ability called Zantetsuken. If Zantetsuken breaks a target or attacks an already broken target, their HP will be brought down immediately to 0. This recast ability ignores effects that function like Last Stand. The brave hits from Zantetsuken will always have 100% accuracy. After Odin triggers Zantetsuken for a second time, he will enter a state called Mounted Unity. During the state, Odin cannot be delayed from being broken, and he will apply a sap effect to the entire party. His Mountain Unity can be dispelled if he is launched. For the normal Chaos version of this fight, Noctis, with his burst and especially his LD, can help tremendously in ensuring that Odin virtually never takes a turn. Noctis can also work extremely well in conjunction with Kais for a launch strategy. A Mid-Italian, if you have their LD in conjunction with their skill 2, can keep Odin's turns at bay with turn deletion. Just be sure you're using an Imperil and Enchant if you're going to be planning on taking a Mid-Italian, because a Mid-Italian is magic brave damage, which Odin does resist. Other options you can consider are characters that inflict paralysis, such as Desh and Raijin, or even characters that inflict some sort of speed debuff. Having sap or some form of brave poison effect can also help keep Odin's brave at bay. It is highly recommended to have characters that can battery, especially when Odin uses Zantetsuken. Rosa or another character who can revive, such as Ishtola, can be used, but keep in mind that resurrecting a party member will hurt your score. As far as the Chaos Challenge goes, it is highly recommended that you have at least Noctis' LD in order to stand a chance. Your only real support for the Chaos Challenge is Paladin Cecil, and it's highly recommended to have him built if you want to tackle the challenge. Your third slot option for the Chaos Challenge can be any of the other synergy you have built, but for a personal recommendation, Fran may be the most desired for her powerful debuffs. You can take Fang due to the mechanics of her launch, but just keep in mind that her output at this point in the game, even with the synergy stats, are not nearly optimum due to her outdated kit. Remember, if you do not have the resources to complete a Chaos Challenge, there will be more coming out later in the future. It is okay to skip that one burst token, especially if your resources to pull might be low. Alrighty guys, so here we are with the Let's Play portion of the video where I'm going to show you guys hopefully how to play Noctis, because I'm going to be honest with you guys, Noctis is actually a pretty complex character, and when you add his LD and his burst weapon to his kit, he becomes a little bit more complex, so it's going to take a lot of paying attention to specific debuffs and buffs to really maximize the way that you're going to be playing him. And the reason why I'm taking a party with him is because I also want to show off his party utility when he actually puts that new unique buff coming from his LD. So that's the reason why you see me taking a full party with him. So I'm just going to go ahead and go through the motions here as far as actions go, because the showcase is Noctis. Alright, so once it gets to Noctis' turn, I'm going to go ahead and kind of hopefully show you guys the ropes, because the character can be a bit complex. Alright, Arciela kind of just doing her thing here. And remember, if you guys have Noctis' EX weapon at least 2 out of 3 realization, he's going to automatically drop point blank warp on all enemies at the start of each wave for 3 turns. So that's why you notice this shadow boss, and I chose this fight for a reason, because it's cool. It's gonna help him, allow him to deal his additional attacks, his triggered secondary attack anytime he deals damage. Now remember, that only comes from the plus versions of his skill 1 and skill 2. However, with the LD, that follow-up always happens. Okay, so now we're at Noctis. The important thing here is to remember we have point blank warp. Now when we use the LD, this is how the LD looks like. So we're gonna use the LD here, and the LD will automatically trigger the point blank warp. follow-up attack just because it doesn't need to have a plus. Okay, so as you notice, we're back to Arciela here. Arciela has a 2-turn buff. It's that 4th buff there. But if you can see right here, there is that buff. What this buff does is it increases that party member's attack by 20%, and anytime they target an enemy, their next turn happens immediately before that enemy takes their turn. So for example, I'm targeting Shadow, right? I'm going to go ahead and take an action with Arciela here under the buff that we got from Noctis' LD. And as you could see, Arciela's next turn immediately moves right before the enemy target will take their turn. So you could see what kind of different strategies you could really do to play around here, because this buff is extremely powerful. And then let's not forget that unique buff, whenever that character takes that specific turn, it does not add to the turn count. So not only is the buff extremely powerful, it has turn shenanigans, but it's also very turn efficient because it doesn't add to the turn count. So there's a plethora of different ways that players can actually use to be able to keep the turn count low, while at the same time preventing the enemy boss from even acting at all. Okay, so now that we've come back to Noctis, we know that he has 2 turns of the warp step buff. So what I'm going to go ahead and do here is actually just use his skill 2. Now we don't have the plus version, but because we have the effects of his unique buff, he's going to get his next turn taken immediately before the enemies. All right, so Arciela is back here. So now we're going to go ahead and just take an action here. And as you can see, we still benefit from 1 turn from that unique buff. And Arciela's next turn goes right before the enemy boss Shadow's turn. So you can see why this buff is extremely powerful. All right, so Noctis, we're going to go ahead in this case, use his skill 1. Now his skill 1, remember, will auto trigger a launch with a plus version, and as you can see, he's taking his next turn immediately before the target. And then with Kais here, I'm not going to do any launch shenanigans here, although there's a lot of different ways you could mess around with launch as far as this. But if you're going to be using Kais with Noctis, because I did mention that for the Odin boss fight, you want to be sure to time when you're going to be using his skill 2, which places his next turn immediately, you know, after whatever party member he places that buff on. Because what's going to happen is that if I do that right now, right, what's going to happen is that the Noctis warp step buff actually takes precedence. So even though Kais's buff normally would put his turn right after the party member that he targets, if he has the warp step on, its warp step will take into effect before that. So you want to be careful if you're going to be using Kais for like launch shenanigans alongside Noctis. But for the purposes of this video, we're going to go ahead and just use a skill 1 so we could see warp step in action. And as you can see, it's an extremely powerful buff because of the fact that we're taking all these free turns right before the enemy can even take their turn. And we got a launch here. Okay, now we're back to Noctis. So now with Noctis, you want to pay attention because now that we have both his skill 1 and skill 2 at their plus variants, now would not be a good time to really use his LD, because remember, the plus versions of his skill 1 and skill 2, after he uses it, as long as the enemy has point blank warp, he's gonna get that effect where he takes his next turn immediately before the targeted enemy takes their turn. So we're gonna go ahead and use it here, and it's at an optimum spacing right now because it's right before Kais, so we're gonna get the auto launch. And as you can see, Noctis' turn moves right before Shadow's does. Okay, and then what I'm going to go ahead and do here is actually, this would be a good time to use Kais's skill 2. So even though we know that the warp step is going to take precedence, we're still going to get that cool effect. Okay, so now that we have that out of the way, we're going to go ahead and use the plus version of his skill 2. As you can see, there are some crazy setups that you could do with this powerful buff effect. It's just so powerful. And there's a reason why Noctis, even on the JP side of the game up to this point, is still considered one of the top 10 characters as far as, like, if you care about, you know, tier list or meta. And there's a reason behind that. It's because that unique buff coming from his LD is just so powerful. And we're going to get to the burst soon, but we're just going to go ahead and take our turns here. Okay. Okay, so we have his EX available here. So what I'm actually going to do here. Okay, so we're going to go into the burst, but the burst, in order to maximize your damage, this is going to be tricky, so I apologize if I mess this one up, but generally, before you go into the burst, you want his skill 1 and his skill 2 to be at their plus version, so then that way you're taking advantage of as many follow-up attacks as you can. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is use his C65, which automatically changes his skill 1 and skill 2 into their plus variants. Okay, so now that we have that set up, let's just go ahead and jump right into the burst. Okay, so now we're at the burst. What I'm going to do here is first we're just going to go ahead and use his LD. And the LD will have that triggered follow-up attack right over here. Okay, so now what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to use his EX. And the reason why is because after he uses his EX, he's going to have a free skill usage of his skill 1, his skill 2, and his C65. So we're going to go ahead and do that here. There we go. Okay, so now we have a free skill usage of his skill 1 and skill 2. Now, depending on what you want to do here, you can either go into his skill 1 or his skill 2, assuming that they're at their plus variant. For this case, because I'm running a character that also influences the launch, I'm going to go right into his free skill 1, the plus variant. Alright, so we got the launch here, which is nice. Okay, so now what I'm going to go ahead and do is actually go back into skill 1. The reason why I'm going to go back into skill 1 in this case is because I know that next turn I'm going to have that auto launch from it. And I want that auto launch when I go right back into being outside of the burst phase. I'm going to do that now. Now I could have gone into his HP attack plus, which would give me the follow-up, but in that case I really wanted the launch. So over here we're going to go ahead and use his skill 2, which gives us the follow-up. Okay, and then afterwards we're going to go into his burst, and I'm going to show off the burst effect too, because his burst effect, unlike other burst effects we've seen where like they just increase damage or they give us some sort of like, you know, utility, this one is different, and this one is actually quite powerful because it's, especially if you think about using a Noctis friend that also has burst. Okay, so for 3 turns, this is what's going to happen. Anytime somebody takes an action and deals damage, Noctis will trigger a follow-up attack, and it can be any party member. Now, it can only happen once per party member turn, and it cannot trigger after a counter attack or after a chase. So we're gonna go ahead and use it right over here. So we're gonna go ahead and go into EX, and you'll see the burst effect in action right after this. And what's cool about this is something that I want to mention, which I will show you guys, is that Noctis will do that follow-up attack that we just saw right there, even after his point-blank warp follow-up. So that's 2 follow-up attacks from Noctis alone. So we're going to go ahead and set this up here with Kais. So Kais has the buff from the LD. And as you can see, Noctis jumps right in and does that follow-up attack, which is really awesome. Arciela, actually with Kais, we're going to go ahead and use his EX right here. And then Noctis just jumps right in and deals additional damage. So that burst effect is unique and it's very, very powerful. It is the only burst effect even up to now that does that. This is why his burst weapon, compared to some of the other ones, is also very, very desired. But remember, what makes Noctis so strong, you know, post all of his upgrades being released, is that LD weapon. And then we got the burst, which is icing on the cake, but the burst effect itself is still really, really strong. So we're going to go ahead with our Arciela, take an action here, because I do want to show off one more thing. And we're going to get to see that beautiful follow-up attack. There we go. Okay. So like I said, that follow-up attack will also trigger after his point-blank warp follow-up attack. So we're going to get to see that in action here. Alright, so it should trigger. There we go. Okay, so that actually triggered after a launch. I guess what I meant to say is that that follow-up attack cannot initiate a launch. So, excuse me, I meant to say that the follow-up attack from the burst cannot trigger a launch, but it will trigger after after the action has taken from the launch. So that is what I meant to say. But hopefully that gives you guys a decent explanation of how to play Noctis. Again, he is a really complex character, so if you guys are going to be planning on building him up, which I know a majority of the player base is going to try to pull for his really powerful burst and LD weapons, it's going to take a little bit of practice, but if you really want to make him shine, it is worth it because he is an extremely powerful character that's going to be carrying you through some of the more difficult stages moving forward in Opera Omnia. Alright guys, hopefully this was very helpful. Thank you guys for watching the video. Stay tuned for the next one, and mahal guys.